As we're getting ready for the next session, I'm going to bring you some of the results of your voting for the poll that we had right before this session when I asked you to vote for the question of, in the era where misinformation spreads rampantly across all levels of societal discourse, social media companies should be entirely responsible for regulating content on their platforms. And the final result, which we closed on with your voting, and voting of those who are following and watching this online as well, not being here with us in New York, is the strongest one was disagree with 37.5%, and the second strongest was agree, 33.3%. So more than 37% disagree that social media companies should be entirely responsible, and over 33% agree, and there was still 0% of votes for being neutral. Now we'll hear from different experts on how the artificial intelligence can address the access to justice challenges. Please welcome on stage Sean West, co-founder Hans Technologies, and our esteemed panel.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Sean West, co-founder of Hans Technologies, a software company transforming corporate legal departments from an engineering hub in Rwanda. We are at an unprecedented moment when it comes to the potential application of new technologies. We know that the way that technology is evolving can solve some of the world's toughest challenges. However, we're mostly accustomed to hearing about that with respect to health or the environment or hunger, and all those topics are really important. But today we wanted to put on the agenda the ability for AI to deliver fair outcomes to those who need it the most through their justice systems around the world. We're looking at an opportunity for artificial intelligence to reduce the cost of legal so that more people can be served, to free up lawyers so they have more time for pro bono work, and to help governments process more cases and anticipate cases to deliver better outcomes. But it's not clear we're going to land at the most optimistic scenario. AI could become something that's only available to the wealthy, or conversely, it could become the only resource that's available to those with less income. So to help me understand which direction we're headed, I'm joined today by Dr. Alejandro Ponce from the World Justice Project and by Darth Vaughn, who's legal innovation lead at Ford Motor Company. Both of my panelists are here in a personal capacity, not on behalf of their employers. Alejandro, could you kick off and give us a bit of background to help understand the justice gap globally?
Thank you, Sean. So to understand the justice gap, we need to think about people's legal needs. So throughout their lives, people experience a lot of problems, and many of which have legal dimension. These problems can range from family problems, housing problems, debt problems, lacking documentation, or even just being a victim of crime, gender-based violence, or abuse by governments. So the problem of access to justice arises when people cannot exercise their rights or defend their rights, which essentially just result in the problem, or when facing this problem, cannot find a resolution. And there are many reasons why this can happen. So probably we can put them in two buckets. So one of them relates to the lack of documentation or legal capability. Just people don't simply have the elements to exercise their rights. Or second, because when trying to solve their problems, they face a lot of barriers in the process, either because they don't know what to do, they cannot access a lawyer or afford a lawyer, or find a resolution through the justice problem. So how prevalent this problem is, we did an exercise to try to quantify this around the world, interviewing thousands of people, and found that about 5.1 billion people around the world lack access to justice. Again, because of many of these possibilities. There is a movement and a possible solution to address this that essentially goes against the traditional view of justice, that it's centered around people and essentially has 5 elements. Justice centered around people and the needs of people, not necessarily the needs of institutions. Second is that it looks at the needs of people across the justice chain, just when the problem arises to the resolution, not only at the courts. Third, it uses data and innovation, which brings us here, and obviously just encourages the participation of public and private sector and holds actors accountable.
Thank you for that. Well, 5.1 billion globally is a huge number. Darth, help us understand the baseline in the US. Is it a better picture or is it more challenging?
It's challenging. I don't know if it's better. So setting aside the criminal context and just looking at civil legal issues, I think about 66% of the population over the last 4 years has had some civil need for addressing a legal issue. And the data shows that the lower you go on the socioeconomic rung, the need gets more intense. So about 74% of low-income people have had the need for civil legal services over the last year. And unfortunately, the data shows close to 90% of that legal need isn't being met. So we have a huge market and opportunity of individuals who need civil legal service delivery that aren't getting it here in the US. And look, there's a lot of factors for why that could be. I mean, we have roughly 1.3 million active attorneys here in the US, which sounds like a lot at first glance. But there are, I guess, barriers to entry, and those numbers appear to be static. So I don't know that the answer lies in simply throwing more bodies at the problem. One of the barriers we have is the cost of a legal education. It is, upwards of a couple $100,000 here in the U.S. So you have lawyers who are at moderate and low income means that are incurring debt to get into the legal profession, and then they need to work that debt off, which means to a large extent they need to focus on higher paying clients. Beyond that, one of the other issues is kind of the legal service delivery model that we have. It is based on primarily the time we spend on a particular issue, which is a poor proxy for value, but also a very difficult thing in terms of transparency, in terms of your legal service delivery. So time is finite. And if you want to spend time on your client's problems, you only have so much time to give. I think we're now at a point, though, with some advancements in technology that time may not be the obstacle that we had in the past.
Thanks for that. And Darth, you're one of the most innovative lawyers in the industry. You've been using AI tools since before it was cool. Help us understand, are we at a moment now where we're going to just have an explosion in capability as a result of it, or should we curb our enthusiasm a little bit?
We have the potential to have an explosion. So yeah, I was a technology consultant before I became a lawyer. Went to law school because it seemed like a good idea at the time and became a trial attorney. And now I'm kind of back at my roots, utilizing technology for the application of the practice of law. Have been using artificial intelligence for several years and have had the honor of using generative AI for over a year. And I think this time it feels different. We've heard for a long time it's coming, it's going to be different, but it does feel different in large part because what generative AI hopefully will give us is the ability to get some of that time back, and hopefully some of that time can be repurposed to serve a larger community that has legal service needs. It's also bringing forth a different model. Many lawyers say, okay, I'd like to get 70 clients to pay me $1,000 for 1 hour's worth of work. Now a different model's emerging where you're saying, all right, can I get 7,000 clients to pay me $100? The latter has a bigger value proposition. Before it wasn't possible because of the time constraints, but now we're I think, in the penultimate step where we may get there if we are intentional about it. I will say this, though, the technology is in the early stages. There's a lot of work to be done. You still need a human being with subject matter expertise and domain knowledge. We're not at robot lawyers yet, right? You still need legal professionals in the loop here.
And Alejandro, you've been tracking digital transformations of legal systems for many, many years. Help us understand, are there any useful reference cases where we can look at governments who've done a really good job at prior technological waves and implementing it to help us understand where we're likely to see AI be harnessed for betterment of access to justice on national levels?
Yes, artificial intelligence obviously has a huge potential to transform the justice system by either making it more accessible, more efficient, more affordable, user-friendly. And probably we can put the different categories of artificial intelligence tackling different problems along the justice journey in 3 buckets. The first one are those technologies that provide information to the users. and do it in a more efficient way. Simply rather than having websites, we can have chatbots or voice recognition patterns that respond to the needs of the people, so the people can ask in their own terms or can help them fill forms or complete documents. So that kind of technology is available just in different parts of the world. Several governments have started doing or using them, even though in the justice sector hasn't been used as much. There are some private companies as well using it in different parts of the world, in Africa, just providing services to clients. Then there is the second bucket. This is technology that help us, as Darth was saying, just with this legal assistance part, right? To simplify all this part of legal aid and help lawyers to prepare documents for us, or even people just to prepare documents, or to just look through cases, help with arguments and so on, which eventually has the potential of making it much more affordable. And there are several companies already doing that, particularly in the US. In Europe, it's a little bit behind, but there are also some companies that are doing it. And the last one is technologies that essentially help judges, prosecutors, lawyers come up with decisions, better decisions, not necessarily only at court, but even just on organizing cases. There is, for example, one very interesting case in Argentina called Prometea, just in the city of Buenos Aires, that essentially has helped Argentina just manage cases, housing cases, cutting the times by 4, for example, cases that will take 1,000 cases that will take almost 200 days, reduce that to 45 days, or even the same technology has been applied in Colombia in the Constitutional Court to organize cases and just prioritize the ones that are just more urgent. So the technology is there, and we start seeing some cases. Obviously, all of those are at the test stage, at the pilot stage. Some countries are making more progress than others. Estonia is doing some interesting progress as well for small claims. But still, just we see that in general, the ecosystem just is slowing very, very slowly.
Thank you. And so, Darth, we can't have a conversation about AI without talking about downside risks. So help us understand, what do we need to be concerned about? What are some of the potential scenarios where AI actually exacerbates this problem, and how do we avoid that?
Good question. And let me start by saying essentially what it can do. So in March of 2023, GPT-4, OpenAI's model, passed the universal bar exam and was in the top 90%. And just to put this in perspective, 3 months earlier, December 2022, it was in the bottom 20% with its 3.5 version, right? So that's how quickly we're moving. I think there are a couple of risks here. One is there's a risk of inaction. There's a risk of sitting here and waiting too long and allowing the technology to develop without understanding what your roadmap is and how you want to approach it, right? The secondary risk is letting it go unabated, meaning that we haven't thought out the worst case scenario. We haven't been intentional about how are we going to apply this for the greater good to a large extent, because look, this technology is expensive at this point. I do expect that we will be ubiquitous one day and baked into much of what we do, but for now, there is a real fear that it will only be accessible to those that can afford it. How do we make this accessible to the masses in a way that betters their lives? And in my mind, it's kind of the perfect opportunity now to see whether or not we can extend ourselves into an untapped market, right? And not only for the sake of profit, but because now that it is potentially commercially viable, you can get more service delivery out there to the populations in need.
And Alejandro, what do you think in terms of risks?
I think some of the risks that Darth mentioned, just I would probably add a couple of them. So Darth mentioned just the digital divide, an important one that some people can be excluded even from the most basic technology. I think another one that it's important is data. So usually artificial intelligence uses data just to produce outcomes, right? So, but if the data is not good, then the outcome is not going to be good. So, and still many countries lack either the capacity to produce data or the openness to actually share it in a format that is usable, or even the standards just so that the different data sets speak to each other. So those are obviously huge challenges. These can even just result in biases that we have heard in many cases that AI may produce biases. In many cases, those biases come from the data itself, that the data has low quality. So I think those are some big obstacles that we'll have to overcome.
Great. And so, we're covering a lot of ground on understanding the technology, understanding its potential applications, understanding its risks. But I find in forecasting, probably the biggest error most people make is on timing, right? So we can see, like, at some point in the future, this technology is going to deliver outcomes that will have a lot of positive benefits, potentially with some risks attached. But how should we think about the time scale across which this plays out? Is this really in the time horizon that businesses and governments should care about? Is this in the next political cycle from a government perspective, or is this playing out in the next 5-year corporate planning cycle, or is this something that that the next generation is really going to be grappling with as well?
If you had asked me 3 years ago, I thought we were 10 years away from where we are right now. That's how quickly we're moving. So if you think the next generation is going to deal with this, you're miscalculated, in my opinion. They will inherit our decisions now. But this needs to be in your 3 to 5 year cycle easily. And I think you need to be in your exploratory phase now. I do have a feeling that this is the type of disruptive technology that if you do not keep up, you will not be able to catch up. Therefore, it's important to be involved at this point now.
And what do you think from your experience watching governments adopt technology? Is this something that's going to be in the short-term time horizon? Are the countries that are most in need of delivering these services able to make the investments or able to access investment from institutions that would support it to be able to make progress over the medium term?
I think it's going to be disruptive for sure. I am not sure whether, given the pace at which governments and the situation is in different countries, we're going to be as fast as in the US. I think in general, there are important obstacles. Most of the technology has been applied mainly in high-income countries. There are obstacles in terms of technical aspects that I was referring to. For example, the data. In many cases, the data does not exist. There are capacity as well. I mean, we heard in the morning, for example, just the necessity to adapt to new government or to create a new government that actually can assimilate these technologies. And the last one, I think, is political and institutional. So in many cases, we still don't have the infrastructures for governments to adapt these quickly and move forward quickly. I think it's going to happen little by little, but I'm not as optimistic as seeing this in 3 years or 5 years, but I think in 10 years we will be there.
Wonderful. Well, in our last minute here, if we were to sort of summarize our point of view and share a bit of advice to either policymakers or corporate executives who are looking out at the promise here and thinking about how they can act now to narrow the justice gap, which we've discussed is quite large but potentially addressable, what would be sort of your summary advice?
Yeah, I think the legal industry is going to need their help in collaboration and having some tough conversations in the years to come about what we consider to be the unauthorized practice of law, and whether legal service delivery can be done by a more modern versus a more traditional means. And look, we have a bunch of rules that are designed in some respects to protect the public. Others will argue to protect lawyers, but all designed before this emerging technology came out. And that alone requires us to revisit them.
Great. Alejandro, final word?
I will say just focus on people's needs, not simply adopt technology for the sake of adopting technology. Look at the entire justice chain, so the solutions along all the justice chain. And finally, I think adopt a risk-based approach. Not all the AI solutions may have the same impact on people's lives. We still need the human aspect there, and we need to consider that.
Well, and thank you both for joining me today, and thank you everyone for your interest in this important topic.